Hello, everyone, and welcome to this episode of PodSafe Chocolate. My name is Clay Gordon. I'm your host, and today we're going to be talking about the future of chocolate, or a future of chocolate, or possible futures of chocolate. And this is a part of my 25th anniversary celebration series. Not only am I going to spend a little bit of time looking at the past 25 years, how I got to where I am today, but I'm also going to be taking a look at the future as viewed through the lens of that 25 years of experience. And today I'm going to make the first foray around a certain topic, which is cocoa alternatives. Before we get there, I'd like to mention that this episode of PodSafe Chocolate is sponsored by the members of the Chocolate Life. You can go over to the Chocolate Life right now. If you're not a member, you can click on the join button. That's all I'm going to say here. I'll get back to it at the end of the episode. But if you're not a member, you can subscribe for free. If you have the financial resources, you can support the work that I'm doing here. And I want to point out that if you are watching this on YouTube, you can go into the live chat replay. If you're watching it on Facebook or LinkedIn, and I got my scheduling issues solved this week, you can go into the comments. And if you have a question you'd like to ask, you have a comment you'd like to make on anything that I mentioned today, please go and let me know. I will get that up on screen, and I will do my best to answer the question. Or if you just want to say hello, go and say hello. I'll get that up on the screen as well. And with that, I am going to go and jump into the heart of today's episode. So for every episode of PodSafe Chocolate, I create a post. And this is the post for today's episode. It's right over there. I'm looking at the future of chocolate crystal ball gazing. And I will do a spoiler alert up front, which is I've been spending quite a bit of time looking at cocoa alternatives. I did 2 recent episodes around a gentleman by the name of Lane Kilpatrick, who started off with lab-grown cocoa and then immediately went into a conspiracy theory around genetically or gene-edited cacao trees. But here I'm going to talk specifically about technologies that are being used to replace tree-grown cocoa, whether it's used to make chocolate, cocoa butter, cocoa powder, however it's used. These are technologies that are going to be used, that are being used to replace tree-grown cocoa. Right? And so, the inspiration for this, this is done live. It's a run of show. You can tell this is done live. There's no script here. If there is any script, I'm going to be reading it from what it is that I posted on screen. But the inspiration for doing this was as I was responding, or as Lane Kilpatrick's videos were still in my brain, I got an issue of Confectionery News magazine, and the newsletter. Well, I got the newsletter from Confectionery News, and it was a special edition titled "The Future of Chocolate." Here is the masthead of the newsletter for that particular day. And I thought that after last week's episode about my journey, that it made sense to focus on the future. And I have talked about the future of chocolate on a bunch of occasions. And if you're interested in that, you can scroll to the bottom of the post and hear at least 4 previous episodes of PodSafe Chocolate or the Chocolate Life Live, or just a simple post where I do talk about the future of chocolate. So it is there if you are interested in following up. Following up on my previous musings on the topic of the future of chocolate. So I'm going to read very, very shortly something from the email from Confectionery News, right? And it is record-breaking prices driven by a combination of climate shocks in West Africa, persistent structural supply constraints, and evolving regulatory pressures have forced suppliers and manufacturers to ask a fundamental question. What does the future of chocolate look like when cocoa's future is increasingly uncertain? Okay, second paragraph. At the heart of the conversation is resilience. For decades, the industry has grappled with well documented challenges in cocoa production: farmer livelihoods, deforestation, aging trees, and underinvestment in origin countries. What feels different now, the article points out or suggests, is urgency. Extreme weather events are no longer anomalies, but recurring disruptions. And the long discussed fragility of global supply chains is now fully visible in price and supply chain issues. A little bit of redundancy there. Right? Before I continue, what I want to point out is that um, this post is acknowledging that the issues have been known for quite some time, for decades, right? The challenges are well documented, and it says that the industry has tried to grapple with them. And I would argue that no, the industry has not seriously tried to grapple with the issues. They've constructed Potemkin Village initiatives. If you look too closely, there's nothing but, pay no attention to what's going on behind the curtain. That they actually haven't seriously grappled with the ideas, right? So I want to push back on that and let you know, right? Right? Extreme weather events are no longer anomalies, but recurring disruptions. And I would make the observation that, yeah, they were inevitable. And nothing that the industry has done, right, has addressed the inevitability of those. They have not made investments, which is one of the things that's mentioned here. They have not made investments in farms and farming in cocoa producing countries and other countries, all right, to address the inevitability of extreme weather events that are associated with climate change. There's been no systemic investment by the industry. Again, Potemkin Village facades that have been created to say, yes, we are addressing it. But I don't believe there's been any real serious intent by the industry or civil society writ large to take care of these issues, to challenge. I believe there are structural issues that prevent civil society organizations, the International Cocoa Initiative, the Cocoa and Forest Initiative, and the like. They can't, they don't have any enforcement power. They can make recommendations and then nothing happens with the recommendations. Okay? So I saw this in Confectionery News, the newsletter, and then that was on the 3rd, today's the 5th, and then yesterday on the 4th, there was an edition of the newsletter from Cocoa Radar, which echoes industry concerns, which Confectionery News refers to euphemistically as extreme weather events. So from Cocoa Radar, growing evidence reinforces concerns that El Nino could pose a major threat to global cocoa supplies during the 26-27 season. So this is in the upcoming season, particularly across key West African producing regions. And then the newsletter goes on to quote the new Barry Callebaut CEO, Heinz Schumacher, who warns that developing El Nino conditions could add a few thousand pounds, those are pounds sterling, to the per metric ton to cocoa prices. So the industry is faced again with a weather event, which was no longer an anomaly, predictable, inevitable, and yet they are structurally unable to admit and take responsibility for, which is one of the reasons, one of the challenges here is the industry is not going to take responsibility for its role in creating the conditions that exist. Right? And so, what the actual future? Right? So, what is, the actual future of chocolate? And I want to suggest that I don't think that there's a future of chocolate, right? Just like there is no, it's just not like fair trade is not the answer. It is a part of an answer. So I don't think there is a future or the future for chocolate. There are possible futures that present themselves to us, and many of those futures, if not most of them, are not so favorable when it comes to specialty chocolate and specialty cocoa, because without specialty cocoa, there is no specialty chocolate. And of course, the answer there is that's true unless we, and by we, I mean the members of the public who care, those of us who are not in the employ of a big chocolate company or one of these civil society initiatives. Right? We can't be in the employ of them. What we need to do is we need to convince um, these companies and these organizations that we don't like the idea that cacao farmers, right, and are being ignored and they're being tossed aside. The real serious threats to the environment are not being responded to seriously, for example, right? So, with all of that set aside, um, I don't think that it's unfair. I'm referring to my notes over here, not to script. Um, I don't think it's unfair to say that the systemic lack of investment in cocoa farming and cocoa farmers by big chocolate, um, even before the enacting of the Harkin-Engel Protocol in 2001, so going back decades. And I realized that 2001, this year is the 25th anniversary. In September will be the 25th anniversary of the enactment of the Harkin-Engel Protocol. I've made a note in my brain, and I will put it in my calendar, that what I will do is schedule an episode of Pod Safe Chocolate in September around the signing date, if I can find the exact signing date, to discuss the history of the Harkin-Engel Protocol. And I may invite Terry Collingsworth. Well, I will invite, and I hope he will be available, Terry Collingsworth at International Rights Advocates to trace that history with me, and maybe some other people as well. Anyway, if you are interested in knowing a little bit more about that, what I've done is I've done a quick footnote, so you can just click on the number. There's a quick footnote there that you can go read about. But the Harkin-Engel Protocol is in fact a link, and if you want to go read about the Harkin-Engel Protocol on Wikipedia, it's there. All right. So volatility in the price of cocoa, right, as a direct result of bad weather, exacerbated by climate change generally, and deforestation for any reason, whether it's farmers looking to move from lower productivity land to new land that is newly cleared land that is more productive, the impact of, for example, mining, gold mining, and other things, whatever the issue, right? The volatility in the price of cocoa as a direct result of those things was inevitable and remains inevitable, right? And during the recent spike in cocoa prices on the futures exchanges to over $12,000 a metric ton, big chocolate, in my opinion, didn't learn anything. Big chocolate learned nothing as a result of the recent spike, right? Um, well, that's not entirely true. I think they learned the wrong lessons. They learned the wrong lessons, right? So big chocolate, right? In my opinion, right? This is a protected opinion here in the United States, still under the First Amendment. Big chocolate thinks it can control the price of cocoa through accommodation of complex hedging strategies. If I if I hedge on the futures exchange, I do short and take short and long positions of it. What I can do is I can try to manage I can manage risk associated with price changes. And those bets on the exchanges are going to have an impact on when and how much cocoa I purchase. But it's basically a financial mechanism that only very, very large companies can participate in them. And many of the companies that are participating in this, right, aren't actually cocoa traders or cocoa processors or chocolate makers. They are companies that trade on agricultural commodities. Right? So somebody in an Armani suit who drives a new 7 Series Mercedes in an air-conditioned office in Chicago pushes a button to execute a futures trade, not realizing that that trade has contributed to perhaps the unaliving of children who are the children of cocoa farmers in West Africa. There's that complete disconnect from what it is that's going on. It's all about abstract money concerns. So complex hedging strategy is a part of it. Another part of it is pointing fingers and laying the blame at the feet of others. Well, where we are right now, right? It's not our fault that this is happening. It's their fault that it's happening. All these other things that are going on that they know about, right? They these big companies are not incompetent in that respect, incompetent in the sense or ignorant in the sense that they lack knowledge. They are very aware of what it is that's going on and what the drivers actually are. If they're not, I don't think they should be in business, right? My opinion. But they are aware of it. If you're a cocoa trader, if you're a processor, if you're a chocolate manufacturer, you know the underlying root causes of these things, right? But you can't take responsibility for them because if you admit responsibility for them, it means you need to pay for them. And these companies are not about to internalize risks and put them on their balance sheets. They want to make sure that everything is externalized. And so they are not admitting responsibility, culpability, even in part because it would mean they might be liable for hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars in reparations. Not going to happen. Right. The other thing they'll do, apart from pointing their fingers at other places, they'll just stick their head in the sand like ostriches and mixing metaphors. They'll cross their fingers and ingest large quantities of hopium that the rain will come and it won't be too much and it won't be too little and it will come at the right time, right? For their concerns because that's what they care about. They're not really concerned about the impact of these things on the lives and livelihoods of farmers. What they do is they care about how it affects their bottom lines. Right. So I think this is obviously an oversimplification, and obviously it is one-sided. It is based upon my thoughts, looking at the industry over the course of 25 years, and having had the opportunity to stand next to a prior CEO of Barry Callebaut, Peter Boone, on several occasions to be able, and his predecessor, and ask some questions and to interview some of the people who are behind the technologies, the alt.cocoa technologies, which are being considered here. Right. So I think it's funny. I think about this, industry sticking its head in the sand. And yesterday, as I was writing this, I was reminded of Monty Python and the Holy Grail. Right. For people who might have watched that movie, you may be familiar with the oft parroted line, "Run away, run away!" Right? um, and this is what I think Big Chocolate is doing, right? They're just choosing to run away from their responsibilities. And it's humorous as a comedic battle cry, right? But it's not funny in this context. Life is not a movie, right? And Big Chocolate faces an existential crisis, right? And which is something that the confectionery news article points out. What is the future of chocolate? Right? Quoting it again, right? Um, Extreme weather events are no longer anomalies, but recurring disruptions, and the long discussed fragility of global supply chains is now fully visible, right? And what does the future of chocolate look like when cocoa's future is increasingly uncertain, right? This is what they're running away from, right? They're running away from seriously tackling or addressing the issues. They're erecting Potemkin villages. These are things that might look like to a casual visitor who's driving down the street, but if you look behind the scenes, you'll see that there's nothing there. There are no enforcement mechanisms. There are no hard targets um, that will result in penalties if they're not met. I mean, that is those are two of the fundamental challenges, or two of the fundamental reasons why Harkin Engel has failed. Well, first one of which is rather than it being overseen by an oversight committee of the US Congress, or progress being overseen by an oversight committee of US Congress, that oversight was handed over to the industry itself, was made voluntary, and there were no enforcement mechanisms, there were no penalties. If you say you're going to do this by X year and you don't meet your goals, what? Right? And there's no way to hold these big companies accountable. right? And if we look at International Cocoa Initiative, Cocoa and Forest Initiative, we look at commitment to the UN SDGs, it doesn't matter. They all suffer from the same structural governance problems, right? There are no enforcement mechanisms, there are no penalties, right? So why should Big Chocolate, right, do anything to change that aspect of the status quo? They don't want to have enforcement mechanisms that result in penalties, right? Right. This is what they're all afraid about with the EUDR. I mean, the EUDR is an official EU regulatory regime, and failing to comply with it results in monetary penalties and perhaps other sanctions. So it requires that level um, of intervention in order to make happen, right? But life is not a movie. Big Chocolate faces an existential crisis. What is the future of chocolate, right? If the future of cocoa, right, is uncertain because of extreme weather events and other supply chain disruptions. I mean, imagine what the price of cocoa would be if a significant percentage of it was on ships and went through the Strait of Hormuz, right? Where would the price of cocoa be right now if that were the case? Very little cocoa, I imagine, is dependent upon um, um, over the water transfer through the strait. But if it were, the shocks would be comparable to the ones that many people are feeling when it comes to the price of gasoline, right? So Coco Reuter explicitly named one of the dangers, El Nino, right? 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 But the result, and this is what Confectionery News is writing about, not only in this article, but throughout other issues of the magazine, and what Cocoa Radar reports on, but neither outlets question, right? Is that Big Chocolate's response is to run away, right? From the challenges, shambling pell mell, again, shamble, I'm liking the metaphor, contrast in there, towards alt cocoa, which is what I call chocolikes, right? So alt cocoa or chocolikes, right? So put simply, big chocolate companies are looking to de-risk their supply chains, and chocolikes are the pathway they are leaning into heavily, right? So what does that mean? So almost all of the companies that we call big chocolate, right? So Mondelez, Nestle, Hershey, companies like that, right, are publicly traded. The two big ones, Mars and Cargill, are not publicly traded, right? But as a publicly traded company, they have a fiduciary responsibility to the return maximize the return to their shareholders. I'm skipping because I can see the video freezing on my end. It may not be obvious on your end, but I'm responding to it freezing on my end. So these public companies have a fiduciary responsibility to maximize the return to their shareholders. And one way they can do that is to minimize the cost of their inputs. Historically, let's do everything we can to keep the cost of cocoa as low as we possibly can to maximize the return to our shareholders, right? And private companies like Mars and Cargill, if they want to compete on the grocery store shelves, are pretty much um, forced to engage in similar kinds of behaviors, right? If if a publicly traded company is buying cocoa at $2,500 a ton, but a privately owned company is saying, "Oh, it costs me 5,000 a ton," they are at a disadvantage when it comes to the price of their products on grocery store shelves. And so these privately held companies are going to do what they can in order to make sure that their cost of inputs is similar to the cost of the inputs of their peers or competitors. This is part of the challenge that is associated with what I think of as extractive economics. It's a form of capitalism. It's not the only form of capitalism. It is a form of capitalism, extractive economics. Sort of Milton Friedman School of Economics, Chicago School of Economics from the 1950s, filtered through Reagan and Thatcher and others. But extractive economics. The only good is profits, right? Well, and all companies should seek to maximize profits. It is the purpose of companies. Anyway, so big chocolate companies are looking to de-risk their supply chains. They want to the extent possible, they want to make sure that the cost of everything is as reliable as possible, right? And by de-risking, again, they don't want to own cocoa farms, right? They don't want anything associated with that, right? Well, what they want to do is they want to say, how do we put our thumbs on the scale to make sure that the price of things remains relatively flat, right? So all of the companies I'm going to talk about, so but all of the companies developing the technologies that are used, whether it's cell culturing, precision fermentation, gas fermentation, plant fermentation, all of those companies can be invested in. So if I'm Barry Callebaut, or I'm Mars, or I'm Nestle, or I'm Puratos, which is the corporate parent of Belcolod, I can make investments in these technology companies. And those companies right now, all of them are privately held, whether it's Planet A Foods or doesn't who makes Choviva. All of these companies are privately held, right? But if they IPO, where somebody decides to buy them, right, or acquire them, the early investors stand to reap huge amounts of money. Their $10 million investment might become $100 million. Their $10 million investment could become worth billions of dollars. And so this is one of the reasons why big companies are investing in these technology companies. It just makes good business sense. And if one of their investments becomes a unicorn, it's great for their investors. And whoever decided, which committee decided to okay the investment, they'll be heroes, right? The shareholders will like it. The C-suite executives who okayed it, they'll all get fat bonuses, right? But here's the problem, or here's something to consider: not one penny will go to cocoa farmers. Not one penny. Right? So these are companies, tech companies, that can be invested in. They're not all of them are Silicon Valley companies, but all right, there is that same upside. So not one of the companies, not one of the tech companies. So if we look at Planet A Foods, Voyage Foods, Win, Celeste Bio, Circe Biosciences, you name any of the companies, not one of them is headquartered, domiciled in a cocoa producing country. What that means is that all of the trickle down, or as I like to call it, tinkle down, because there's somebody up here who's peeing, right? Tinkling down, right? And it's yellow, so it looks like gold on the people below them. So, and I apologize if you think that's a gross metaphor, but I like to think about the trickle down in that way. It humanizes it in an interesting kind of way, and it really does display the power dynamic of the people who have the money and the people who do not. But all of the trickle down benefits of the investment, right? So if Puratos is investing $10 million in this company and they're scaling up their factory, right? All of the investments go to countries that do not produce cocoa. There's not one of these factories, right, involved in cocoa tech that is currently in a cocoa producing country, and likely not going to happen, right? Because it's, even though it might be more expensive to build and staff a factory in Europe, the supply chain is much shorter, right? And I don't risk a bunch of things. It's just like, it's in my backyard. It can be down the road 20 kilometers, right? Or kilometers, depending on where you're going. So it's really important to understand that dynamic. So all of the benefit of this construction, right, is going to the workers in a consuming country, right? Or workers in a country in Europe, right? It's not going to the farmers. Not one penny, right, of the construction, equipment sourcing, none of it is going to cocoa producing countries or to farmers, right? So, right, the third part of this is ingredient supply chains are shorter, right? Grains, seeds, other agriculture and chemical inputs, carob, for example, are sourced in the US and the EU. None of the inputs that are used for alt cocoa are subject to any EUDR compliance. I don't think soy is one of the inputs that's being used. And so we're looking at sunflower seeds, other kinds of seeds, grains, barley, things like that. None of them are subject to the EUDR, and all of them are grown in the US and the EU, right? And other places, right? Places where there is no ongoing deforestation, right? Because the supply chains are shorter, literally, I could have, right, my farm, you know, in the same county where I'm located. Um, they have a smaller carbon footprint. I'm not shipping things tens of thousands, or not tens of thousands, but thousands of kilometers. Um, it has been suggested that bioreactors for cell cultured cocoa use less water, right? That's probably true at a lab scale. It has yet to be proven at manufacturing scale, but those are the claims, right? About using less water, follow, smaller footprint, supply chains are shorter. The companies can say, we're more sustainable now, right? Um, for the most part, these are lab scale, right? Or very, very small production pilot plants. They're not at scale yet. So there's no full life cycle assessment. There's no full cradle to grave life cycle assessment, or LCA, which has been done over the course of many years. It's just way too early, right? And we'll need to wait until the technology is mature and it's in production for a while. But will a penny of the savings on de-risking the supply chain, shortening the supply chain, using less water, all these guys, will any of it go to cocoa farmers? The answer is, what do you think? What do you think? No, it's not going to happen, right? So I want to take a quick break right there and say to Carlos Mauricio Rivera Lozano, who is calling in from Colombia. Carlos, thank you very much for giving a quick shout out today. Colombia is at the heart of where cacao might have been first recognized by humans in the Holocene. So it's up there somewhere in the Colombia, Peru, Ecuador, modern day borders. There's some thoughts that what we think of as criollos, that genetic originated somewhere in Colombia. So I'm curious to know. I mean, you have one very large company, Casa Lucar, in Colombia, and maybe do you know anything about do they have any plans on using some of this technology? I'm sort of curious if you've heard anything in Colombia. Um, and then a quick shout out to Samuel Hosea from Nigeria. Thank you very much for joining, Samuel. I've been to Nigeria twice. Once in 2022, once in 2024. I was in Lagos, Abuja, and in Cross River State, so Calabar and Econ. Not sure what's going on there, but as a producing country, I don't know that there is going to be any benefit, right, to big chocolate. I don't think Ofi or any big company that's buying a lot of cocoa out of Nigeria is going to be interested in developing a huge plant to produce cocoa alternatives in Nigeria. Just curious what your thoughts on that, and if you know something I don't know, because I can't be everywhere. And then just a quick shout out to Mayana Cacao, Maria from the Bruce Peninsula, Ontario. Happy 25th. Thank you very much, Maria. I'm curious um, um, what your thoughts as a small chocolate maker, what your thoughts about cocoa alternatives are. I mean, I firmly believe that um, specialty chocolate relies on specialty cocoa, and I don't think at any place we're going to find a chocolate-like product which is going to critically, legitimately qualify as a specialty cocoa product. Just my influence, just my thoughts there, but intuition. Let me know what you think. Interested in knowing. So, Carlos, yeah, I mean, Nacional de Chocolate, the largest company, Casalucar would be number two. For people who've never been to Colombia, the Nacional de Chocolate produces the first ever product of theirs I had was, ironically, in Ecuador, a Jet candy bar. Uh, I don't remember it being very good, but that's one of the reasons why it was we were tasting it. So yeah, Nacional de Chocolate. Um, uh, I would have to go look and find out, is Colombia a net importer of chocolate? I mean, certainly when it comes to or chocolate or cocoa, certainly if you're doing industrial scale candy, right, then trying to find a way to reduce the cost of one of your ingredients, chocolate, makes sense, right? And so maybe it's only a matter of time, but I do have some things to talk about there. And then a quick shout out to Mike at Encore Coffee and Chocolate in Kansas City, Missouri. Hey, Mike, thanks for joining us today. Appreciate all of that. And we've got people from LinkedIn and YouTube, right? So that's great. So let's jump to the next spot, which is globally, right? The markets for chocolate, so real and chocolate-like products, right? And cocoa generate an estimated like 250 billion US a year. A little bit less, a little bit more, depends on who you talk to and what you actually count. Is chocolate ice cream in there? Is chocolate yogurt in there? Are you including cocoa in that? So there's some number, but generally people think it's around 200 billion, 250 billion globally, right? Within 10, 20%, right? So how much is big chocolate earmarked, right, for farmers to help them make the transition? So big chocolate is looking at saying chocolate products, but if we go that way, we're abandoning cocoa farmers. How much money, right, are we committed as an industry? Has big chocolate committed as an industry to helping farmers perhaps transition from cacao to some other agricultural commodity? And I'm going to let the Jeopardy theme. Imagine the Jeopardy theme playing. Da, 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 da. We're imagining the Jeopardy theme playing in the background. How much do you think that? And before I answer that question, Samuel says, I'd love to connect and share more. I'm happy to know you're concerned about the future of cocoa production and its farmers from origin. Thank you. What you can do, Samuel, if we are connected on LinkedIn, message me. Or you can go to the Chocolate Life, or you just go to email and send an email to me, Clay at thechocolatelife.com, and I will get it, and we can start a conversation about what's going on and what we can do. Right. So hopefully you've all been listening to the Jeopardy theme play in your brain. And I don't see that anybody has actually tried to answer the question in the chat, but here's what I'll tell you. Right? I did some meta research. I'm not doing the research. I have a specially crafted. Um, I use multiple LLMs, so Claude and Gemini and ChatGPT, and they all know who I am. So they have a huge body of knowledge about my background in previous searches, and I have instructed them about what to think of as sources and how to reply. Right. And so I asked these LLMs, how much money has Big Chocolate committed to this? And I was only able to find one concrete farmer support initiative with committed funding, just one, right? That is from the Alter Eco Foundation. So it's a nonprofit associated with the company Alter Eco, whose chocolate is made for them by Chocolats Alba, a Swiss company, by the way. And what they have done is they have committed to $1.5 million, right, to help transition cacao farmers in its supply chain. So they got $1.5 million that they're going to commit to the farmers that they source from. Okay, that's good. I think that's a good idea, right? While driving awareness about regenerative farming. Okay, understand what's going on there, right? But Barry Calabout, no. Mondelez, no. Puratos, who owns Belcolod, no. Meiji, Lindt, Hershey, None of them have publicly committed to earmark any money. They've made sort of hand wavy Hark and Engel style, yeah, well, we'll think about it kind of commitments for which there are no deadlines and no penalties for not doing what they're saying they're doing, right? So that's just it, right? Big chocolate, not a penny in committed funding, just vague promises, as I say, exactly like the ones with Hark and Engel. Um, and that brings me to sort of a little mid episode ad read, which is that this is the 25th anniversary of the Chocolate Life, and there is now a special lifetime membership in the Chocolate Life. If you want to support the work that I'm doing here, you can click on the link and go to this post, and it explains everything there is about lifetime memberships. And I appreciate it because your support makes episodes like this and all the work that I do possible. So I appreciate that. End of ad read. Maria for Mayana Cacao, again, Ontario, Canada. I think that while Big Chocolate is looking to survive with alternatives to cocoa, that's an opportunity for us craft chocolate makers and farmers who value quality and sustainable practices. And Maria, I don't disagree, right? I think it is an opportunity, but there's one structural problem that we face is that the craft chocolate industry writ large, not the fine chocolate industry, but the craft chocolate industry doesn't have a singular voice, right? Or a singular message, right? If I have 3,000 individual small makers, each one of whom is using different language and making a different message, right? And talking to only the people that they interact with, it's much, much harder. And that's one of the reasons why I've been working on creating this organization called SCHI, right? The Specialty Chocolate and Cocoa Alliance International. I want to be able to provide that voice. I want to take all of you small makers, Mayana among them, and be able to give you language that you can use. So we're all talking about the same thing in the same way. I think it's really important because if we as an industry are confused, it's no wonder consumers are confused. If we're confused, consumers are confused, right? And so um, I think it's really, really important that we gather in this way. And so far, in my opinion, organizations like the Fine Chocolate Industry Association have proved themselves either incapable or not interested in doing that work. And they certainly haven't been able to gather the number of people necessary or the funds necessary in order to be able to do the work. And that's one of the reasons why I'm working on this organization called SCHI, is to fit the gap between the FCIA and the World Cocoa Foundation. There's nothing, right, that's representing the industry that's anywhere in between. And that's what SCHI is all about. So I'm going to go briefly through these two alternative approaches, right? Um, right. So one of which is Mars doesn't appear to be investing in alt.cocoa in the sense of precision fermentation or other things. What they're doing is they're investing in genetic research to say, how do we produce varieties of cacao that are more disease resistant, that are more resilient in climate change. Whatever you think about gene editing and things like that, separate issue, but it appears that Mars is doing that. I don't think it's a bad idea, right? I think we need to be very careful about planting monocultures. If the idea is to replace, you know, large swaths of individually managed smallholder farms and replace them with, very, very large monocultures, I think that's a bad idea because all it takes is a little work for Mother Nature to be able to, say, "Ooh, well, I I used to be able to occupy this tree, but now I can't. So I'm going to change the genetics of whatever virus or fungus, and now I'm going to be able." So if you have large monocultures, it's a really, really bad idea, right? There was something that showed up on LinkedIn. I saw it for the first time in the past week. It's a product called Cocoa Less, which is trademarked, and it turns and the conversation that caught my eye is somebody said, "Is this coupe-Wassou?" Right? And somebody said yes, and that got me to thinking, oh, that's sort of interesting. Could I take Theobroma grandiflorum, which is the Latin name for cupuaçu, and could I transplant it in West Africa? I mean, would it be less resistant to things like cocoa swollen shoot virus? There's not a whole lot of research on it, but the research that there is suggests no, CSSV would find grandiflorum a host, and it would take years for these trees to become productive, and they'd have to go through quarantine to make sure that nothing in the way of pathogens from the new world made their way into Africa, because that would be a disaster if witch's broom made it from Brazil to to um, Ghana and the Cote d'Ivoire. There's no understanding about disease resistance there, so it would really hurt production. But I thought that was a pretty interesting idea. I did a little research on Theobroma bicolor, and it turns out that it might be a little more disease resistant to cocoa swollen shoot virus. But it turns out that the total production of cupuaçu, the total production of grandiflorum, the total production of bicolor is really, really small compared with cacao, even though they're all in the same family. And so it's no short-term panacea, so short-term to think about other forms of cacao filling in the gap. Still cocoa, still Theobroma, even if it's not Theobroma cacao, in the same family. But it turns out that there's this other company, right, which is based in Dubai, right? They're called Keon FZ um, and they've been promoting about a product line they've got called Cocoa Less, and they're talking about it being a solution to the problems with cocoa. Obviously, Cocoa Less, we're using less cocoa or without cocoa, right? But it turns out after some research that all they're doing is they're selling cocoa butter equivalents and cocoa butter replacements, which have been around since forever, right? And not one of them is based on cupuaçu, right? So they're using traditional inputs like shea. It's not mango. It's not clear if they're using palm. There's not a whole lot of information about them, right? But I thought it was interesting, right? That somebody went to cupuaçu for some reason, and I was able to do some research, and there is not a whole lot of research on the disease resistance of other species of Theobroma compared with common pathogens that we find and diseases and pests that we find in West Africa. So it was interesting to me, but it was another rabbit hole to go down. I spent an hour or so going and taking a look at this over the course I am. So what I want to do is I want to give you a little insight, if I can, into my research methodology. And so here is one conversation around this topic that I did over the course of the last couple of days in support of today's. Now, you're not going to be able to read it really, right? But I just wanted to know, for example, so this is Claude for anybody who's not familiar. I have the Pro plan. I'm currently using Haiku, as you can see, as the model, the large language model that I'm using. Um, and my Claude instance has a lot of history working with me. I mean, I'm not, but hey, here are, these are the chats in the last week or so that have been involved around all the topics that I've been using, right? But specifically, I've told Claude a lot about me, so it knows my background. It has an idea about the voice that I want it to respond in, and I've uploaded a lot of documents into projects that it can know about me, and I've turned on memory, and so it can go across conversations, and so it knows a lot of what it is that I know. And what I try to focus on is I try to focus on things that are substantive. So I'm looking for not for opinions necessarily. Um, I'll show you about something I did. But right, just so here is a prompt. that I used toward the end of my research yesterday. Again, meta research. I'm not doing primary research. I'm using the LLM to be able to go and do the research based on what it is that it knows. And so, what are the predominant technologies? So, I'm reading it here. It's blocked, but you can't read all of it. What are the predominant technologies used to produce cocoa alternatives? Two I am aware of are A, cell culturing, and B, precision fermentation. Are there other approaches discussed, one, in the literature that are two, still in the lab and or in commercial production? So I'm asking it straight factual questions. I'm not asking it to opine. And then I say, how do these technologies work? How are they the same and different from each other? How effective are they at producing nature identical fats? Well, can I use any of the techniques to produce cocoa butter? So, so that's the prompt. And here is the thinking, right? So the user is asking about cocoa alternatives. What are predominant technologies? What are the approaches? How do they work? Similarities and differences. Effectiveness of producing cocoa butter. And I go and show more, and it says it knows about me. All right, this is a current comp, boom, boom. So it knows something about me. And then I have all of the sources, right? So if I wanted to one by one go and review the sources, I have the sources here that it pulled from. Really important. And some of them, like I've got PubMed, I've got SpringerLink, ResearchGate, I've got Food and so I've got some actual repositories of research in addition to public articles like Confectionery Production Magazine. But I have a chance to review these. And then what it did is it got a reply, right? So it said there are four primary approaches: cell culturing, precision fermentation, gas fermentation, and plant based fermented ingredients. So this is more traditional fermentation. It's not precision fermentation. There is a difference there technologically. And it's given me the differences between them and some of the companies who are using them, right? And then it talked about the nature identical fats problem, right? And and it gave me the link to a couple of companies that are working on this, right? And when it comes to using technology to produce nature identical cocoa butter, this is an area that I think needs to be explored in depth. And particularly, there's a company called Circe Biosciences that is using gas fermentation, which means they're extracting CO2 out of the atmosphere, and then they have tailored engineered microbes that convert the CO2 to nature identical lipids. So you would not be able to tell the difference between a this gas fermented cocoa butter and cocoa butter that was expressed from a tree, except the gas fermented cocoa butter would have no aroma and no flavor molecules. It would just be the fat, right? And obviously, if I've got cocoa butter, and especially undeodorized cocoa butter, some I got some flavor and aroma compounds in there as well. I suppose they could be added back in, but that makes no sense. But I think that if you were to be able to do nature identical cocoa butter, that what you could do is you could reduce and use it for pharmaceutical and beauty purposes, right? That you would make a lot of the cocoa more available for chocolate making. It would drive down the prices of things, is what it is that I'm saying, right? Because we wouldn't depend it upon real cocoa butter extracted from the things. Now, I haven't really done any exploration of the economics of that. This is sort of an intuitive thing, don't understand, but I think that this kind of biosynthesis through gas fermentation to create natural cocoa butter and have that cocoa butter go to pharmaceuticals and to dairy to beauty applications could be really really cool. Um, not entire yeah again, you know, haven't been able to think it through. But if I could do that, we could also um, create nature identical palm kernel oil fractions. And so rather than harvesting, you get the idea. There might be applications for this technology, and at the same time, what we're doing is we're pulling greenhouse gases out of the air, CO2 specifically. That's the source of carbon that they're using. And if this were a solar or alternative energy powered facility, not a gas powered facility, it could be really cool on a lot of different effects. So, right, just looking and just saying. All right. So after it did that, I asked it, who are the most cited players, including the ones that already mentioned. So, go and, here you've mentioned a whole bunch of companies. Who are the major players when it comes to developing the technologies? At this stage, I'm not interested in investor or customers. What does the tech development landscape look like? For example, Voyage Foods and Win-Win classify by the technology, right? So it said, here are the companies that are doing cell culturing, right? Here are the companies that are doing precision fermentation using engineered microbes, right? Here are the people who are doing plant-based fermentation, which means they're using naturally occurring microbes. They're not engineered microbes. And then who is also using upcycling? So, right. So now I have a table of people. So you can see that I'm sort of working incrementally. I'm working toward a goal, right? So show me the landscape, show me the players, right? And then who are the most common? Who are the ones? Which ones are the most commonly discussed, right? And so then I asked the question for each of the companies listed in the prior response, generate a table of publicly disclosed investors. And that's what's over here on the right. So, for example, let me go to um, CRC Bioscience, right? So this is here, right? So we know the investors are the Harvard WIST Institute. Turns out the technology was invented at Harvard. And I have to apologize. In the past, I've been conflating in my mind CRC Bioscience and Celeste Bioscience. Different companies doing different things, right? Um, their proof of concept chocolate from gas fermentation. I don't know that the proof of concept chocolate. I know they've done cocoa butter. Right? But what I've got here is a list of most of the major players in alt cocoa technology development that have been publicly disclosed or have been disclosed in public literature, who they are, where they're located, and who their investors are, who their customers are, and when such information is publicly available, I have an indication of how much money has been invested in the companies. And so I haven't taken the next step, which is so Puratos um, appears to be the most strategically active. So this is the company that's appears to have invested more money than anyone else. And so this is over here. Um, this is more background on here on these people. But the next step that I wanted to talk about, and that's occurred to me just this morning, and so I haven't incorporated this. I haven't finished it, so I haven't incorporated. Is to understand Big Chocolate is investing a whole lot. They seem to have made up their minds that the only way to de-risk their cocoa supply chain is to invest in alternatives. And so right now, roughly 4 million metric tons of cocoa is harvested on an annual basis, give or take a little. It's somewhere in that. And that 4 million metric tons that's, by the way, that's 4 million metric tons dry, which means it's about 10 million metric tons wet, because 60% of water loss by weight during fermentation and drying, in case you wanted that rough stat. So here's the interesting notion that it looks like the estimated total disclosed capacity, right? And that's not production volume, it's capacity, right? That the estimated total disclosed capacity is about 26,500 metric tons, right? Across all of the companies that have been listed here. That appears to be the case. Again, this is capacity, not actual production. Many companies are still ramping up. Realistic current production across all cocoa alternative is likely to be 20 to 30,000 tons this year, right? I then said, how big is carob? And carob is 480,000 metric tons, although it turns out that only a relatively small amount of it, and that's why I'm saying I haven't, you know, done all the work that I need to do. Oh, it looks like if you're looking at carob chips for chocolate, that's about 43,000 tons. That's still 1.5 to 2 times the total capacity of fermentation-based cocoa alternatives. And so there is an economic argument to be made, right? Um, which is around the fact that big companies are terrified that the supply chain that they have relied on for well over 100 years, right, is falling apart, right? And that they literally have no control over it because, from a key perspective, they've decided to maintain a hands-off relationship. They don't own farms, right? If they do own farms, they're small experimental farms. They don't own huge production farms, right? They're not in the business of farming, all right? They're in the business of trading cocoa or processing cocoa or making chocolate to sell to people who will take those ingredients and turn them something else and turn them into something else, like ice cream or candy bars, right? That's what's going on. And so they have deliberately kept hands off, while at this except to the extent they're exerting market power, right, to keep the price as low as they possibly can, right, because they are obligated to under their fiduciary responsibility as a public company. And so this is so, can we really say that with, 4 million metric tons of cocoa that were harvested, you know, around now, right? So, right, as compared to 20,000 tons of across every single producer of an alt dot chocolate, alt dot cocoa chocolate-like product. Um, what's the future? Don't know the answer to that question, but I want it to be considered, which is why I'm bringing it up. It appears that big chocolate has, in fact, is on the verge of abandoning cocoa farmers, right, in favor of something that they can control. At some point, the price curve will change, and that, making Choviva, right, if it isn't already, will be cheaper than making chocolate. And what I want to understand, and I will continue to understand because this is going to have an impact on the future of specialty chocolate. If you like that single origin chocolate bar, right, which may or may not be made with anything else other than cocoa butter and sugar, right? If you're looking for that specialty chocolate, what is the future of the price of that bar if the cocoa supply chain just craters around the world, right? That cocoa farmers are being encouraged to abandon cocoa to go into something else. What's going on? And we need to start really being aware, right, of what the current state of production actually is, right? And who is involved in investing in these technologies and not investing in these technologies, and what the commitments are and where things are likely to go. And which is what I wanted to do today. Kyle, it's interesting. More direct trade is the solution. Um, I would say it is a part of a solution, right? I don't think there is ever the solution to anything. And so I would like to know, and we're a couple of minutes past, but I'm willing to stay for another 5 or 10 minutes if people are interested. What do you mean by direct trade? How do you define what direct trade is? Right? Because I don't necessarily know that you and I have the same definition for what direct trade is. Put your answer into the comments. I will get them up on screen and I will respond. I will respond before the end of the episode. The other thing that I want to point out is what we can all do, right? What we can all do, okay, is we can band together and create a common vocabulary for what's going on, right? And just for fun, because I've been working with an LLM and I wanted to talk about it. Um, is I asked Gemini, I asked Gemini to render an image around this whole concept. The prompt is really, really long. I created the prompt in Claude and then copied it into Gemini. But this is what it is that Gemini rendered. So, right. And, I wanted for social media. And I thought, listen, even though I said this is set in West Africa, right? I specifically said we're in West Africa. What it did is it gave me Caucasian farmers, right? Which I thought was just a hoot. And I asked it to re-render, and it gave me um, this. Let me see. Right, right. To which I added some text, and I said, "Oh, can you do it in the style of Frank Miller, like Sin City, as opposed to?" I mean, it's like I was playing with visual styles. Um, it's still remarkably LLM adjacent. I think it's obvious this was generated by an AI. So I don't know that I want to use it. I might use it as inspiration for an artist to do something like it. The text is just, there's way too much of it. Um, but these are the sorts of, I don't know if you like it. I think, having it to be AI, real farmers should be used. And I don't want them to be staged photos either. But this is the sort of direction we need to do. All right. So having gone there, let's respond to Kyle. So direct trade means helping with fermentation profiles, agronomy, and market access. So Kyle, really, 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 direct question, right? What do you know about fermentation? What do you know about fermentation? If you're going to go and buy directly from a cocoa farmer, I don't care where it is, when you say help with fermentation profiles, do you have lab experience, right? That, right, tells you that you can go to, somebody who's been farming cocoa for his family has been doing it for generations, that you can tell them how to do it better, right? Just number one. Agronomy, I would say the same thing. What experience do you have around cocoa agronomy specifically? Now, market access, I think, is a good idea. I think it's a great idea. My definition of fair trade or direct trade starts with, right, developing a long-term personal relationship with a farmer, right, and the farming family, right, that you go there on a regular basis. It's about the relationship as much as in anything else, and a commitment as much as anything else. If you're going to directly trade with somebody, you're going to show up and you're not going to abandon them. You're going to do what it is you're going to do, right, with them, and you've made the commitment to them, right? It's also a respect. You're going to listen to what they want rather than you telling them what they need. It needs to be a bottom up, not a top down relationship either, right? I don't know where you are in New Zealand. All right. So I'm just, you say, there is an existing business model in New Zealand. Dairy farmers, it's now one of the largest milk processors globally. Um, right. But dairy farming generally is very different a than a distributed network of smallholder cocoa farmers, right? Most of whom are running 1 to 2 to 3 to 5 hectares at most, right? Producing what, 400, 600 kilograms per hectare. It may be that there is a dairy model that is um, proven in dairy in New Zealand, but that's not cocoa farmers in Cote d'Ivoire or Ghana. And so it would be interesting to know more about the model. You can email it to me, and I'd love to take a look at it, talk about it. But I don't know that it works directly. So you have 10 years running commercial farming enterprises, won an international chocolate award last year, gold in Europe for white chocolate. So congratulations on your international chocolate award last year. You've been running commercial farming enterprises where? And are they cocoa farmers in producing country? You do say that you are a cocoa farmer yourself, and it looks like you may be working in Mexico, Tabasco, Chiapas, right? It's hard to know, right? I've spent quite a bit of time in Tabasco between 2015 and 2019. I made somewhere between 8 and 10 trips. I was involved specifically with a federal government and the state of Tabasco initiative to improve the quality, however you want to define it, of cacao, which is grown in Tabasco specifically for export. And so I do have quite a bit of experience um, in understanding that. Um, Again, we can have this argument about what direct trade means, right? But this is, I believe, part of the heart of the matter, part of the challenge of the matter is that, right, you and I have different ideas about what direct trade means. And if I were to go to 40 other companies that practice quote unquote fair trade, I'd probably have another 40 definitions for what direct trade meant, right? If we as a community can't come together, right, to agree on what basic terms, I mean, Scharfenberger and John Scharfenberger and Robert Steinberg coined the term bean to bar, right, in the way it's used today, in what, 1996, 1997, so 30 years ago, and we still don't have a single globally agreed upon definition for what bean to bar is, or tree to bar, or farm to bar. We don't know what craft is. We don't know what artisan means, and how bean to bar and craft and artisan might be related to each other, and what does this all mean with respect to direct trade. We have no consensus definitions about anything, right? And one of the things that I want to do with this organization, Sky, is to say, listen, we may not come to complete agreement, but we're not going to let perfection stand in the way of progress. Right. So, what do we mean by specialty chocolate? What do we mean by specialty cocoa? Rather than go through the same process that the coffee world did, where it took them decades, 20 years to figure out what that meant, right? And so they could coalesce around the definition and push it forward. Why don't we in chocolate look at what it is that coffee has done and say, how are we going to adapt that? So in the short term, we have a definition that we can use so that we can say your specialty cocoa, your specialty cocoa, your specialty cocoa. And if you want to call yourself a specialty chocolate is made with specialty cocoa beans. Very, very simple. We haven't talked about how it's made. We haven't talked about who makes it. We haven't talked about genetics. We haven't talked about fermentation. We haven't talked about origin. None of that stuff, right? But what we've done is we've got a group of people who are expert judges. They're trained judges. They've received a certificate of judging, right? And they say that this cocoa can make good chocolate, right? And maybe that's where we start for a definition of specialty, right? And when it comes to direct trade, I mean, again, absolutely, I think that we can help them with direct involvement in the farm level, but the involvement at the farm level needs to come from them, not from us, right? That's the important thing. And this, I believe, is one of the successes of perhaps the most successful small direct trade cocoa chocolate company in the world, which is Askinosie. I mean, Sean has been very humble. I've been with him. I was with him on his first bean buying trips to Venezuela and to Mexico, right? And everything that I think that he has done has come from the bottom up. It was not him telling his farmers what they need to do. It was his farmers and their families and the communities that those farmers live in telling Sean what they needed. And then Sean figuring out how he would be able to accommodate those needs within a business model that was profitable so that he could share profits with his farmers, right? So I don't disagree with you that, right, direct involvement in the farm is not necessarily a part of the definition for direct trade. I just want to be very, very clear that we understand where the direction is coming from, right? Because it tends to be top down rather than bottom up, and I think that's a risk that we run that we need to avoid. And then finally, and Kyle, props to you. International Chocolate Awards in Europe. It is an achievement. And if you want to sort of DM me privately, or put a comment in someplace else, be interested in knowing what the bar was and where you're from, because I'm sort of curious in all of those sorts of things. And then finally, from Samuel Hosea in Nigeria, this will be a huge shift in the cocoa and chocolate ecosystem. I want to believe the nutrients, taste, and flavor of pure bean to bar chocolate cannot be replaced 100% by any advanced technology. I think this is a good place to end the discussion, Samuel. And here's what I will say is that one of the things that can be done using gene editing, precision fermentation, cell culturing, all these technologies, is that you can produce a finished product that is quote unquote more nutritious. So I can, for example, create a powder, right? A very low fat powder, which is very high in flavanols, right? So, and this is one of the things that Meiji is doing. They're purchasing a high flavanol cocoa powder that they're going to incorporate into products from California cultured. So um, that horse has left the barn already, right? It is possible to tailor any particular culture to deliver a particular result, and you could have a high flavanol, high magnesium, um, pick a pick a nutrient, and then by blending, you don't necessarily need to do it in one bioreactor, but you could have a range of different enhanced cocoa powders, and you could mix them together to deliver a specific formulation. So that's not likely to be possible. So as I say, that the idea that cocoa is always going to be more nutritious than um, tree-grown cocoa is well, the idea that tree-grown cocoa is always going to be or a chocolate bar made from tree-grown cocoa is going to be more nutritious than a cell-cultured chocolate-like product, a cocoa alternative. Um, as I say, that's already that's already not something that you can count on. It turns out that yes, I can use the technology to deliver very very specific nutrient profiles, and which again a particular fermentation approach might emphasize one, but you could blend them together and you could get a specific highly nutritious cocoa powder um, by using a variety of techniques, right? Um, but when it comes to flavor, right? Um, my experience so far is that all of these make sense. All of the chocolate alternatives, all the chocolate-like products I have tasted made from alternative cocoas are suitable to be used, right, in industrial products, right, not specialty products. Right? And for example, if I have a candy bar, so I'll name something, Three Musketeers, fluffy nougat in the center, right? Um, and all I'm doing is I'm putting a thin layer of something around the outside. It The chocolate taste isn't why people are consuming it really. They're not thinking about this as a specialty product. And in that respect, that's where I think these chocolate-like products are going to exist. The challenge is the specialty cocoa is only 5% of the market right now, right? And that creates a really interesting kind of dynamic. I think a dangerous kind of dynamic for specialty chocolate and fans of quote unquote bean to bar. I prefer specialty to bean to bar. Um, but you're on the right track when it comes to that. So I have yet to see any of these cocoa alternatives make a chocolate product which can deliver anything close to the kind of flavor intensity and complexity. This, and yet, is the important part of this um, that a good from the bean chocolate bar, you know, good genetics, good agronomic product practices, good post harvest processing, properly roasted, properly produced, put it into a bar, and I haven't seen anything yet in the alt dark chocolate space, the chocolate space, which can produce anything which can compare with it. But who knows? Um, if that will change or when that will change. And I don't think Big Chocolate cares. It just wants a product that can replace, cheap compound right, that they can wrap around a Snickers bar more than anything else right now. But we'll see, right? And with that, I just want to point out that if you're interested, I got a couple of YouTube people here. If you haven't liked the video, please do. If you're not a subscriber to the Pod Save Chocolate channel, please go subscribe. If you're not a member of the Chocolate Life, please join the Chocolate Life and support the work that I'm doing. Since 2008, there's always been a free membership tier, right? If you do have the resources to support the work that I do, memberships start at as little as $5 a month. Memberships at the higher level come with coaching and consulting hours. And if you want to really show your support for the month of June associated with my 20th anniversary, there is a special offer on lifetime memberships. I've already had a couple of people join them, so that's really, really cool, and I appreciate it. I want everybody to have a great weekend. This coming Tuesday is the June News and AMA session. If you've got any questions about 25th anniversary stuff, the News and AMA episode is a place to get ready and ask me during the live stream, and I'd be happy to go and answer all of the questions to the best I can. Here in Arizona, where I live, we're having our first 90-degree for people like 32, 33 centigrade, 90 Fahrenheit days. So it's going to be a warm weekend here. But wherever you are, I hope you realize and you take to heart, if you're working with chocolate and you're not having fun, you just might be doing it wrong. Until the next time, everyone, ciao.